I think it's obvious. I'm Dave, and this is Dave Takes It On.
And I'm Jonas, so I'm usually behind the scenes, cameraman, video editor, thumbnail creator, responding comments, managing the Patreon account with all of the behind the scenes content that we put out for our regular viewers.
I think on this first podcast, it would be interesting to go back, Jonas, to the very beginning of our relationship with YouTube. And it was actually a bit of a competition, and many of our viewers probably don't realise how we actually started. So would you like to just introduce that element of it?
Absolutely. So the channel started, there was an idea of it back in 2022, but the first meeting we ever had for the channel was the 1st of January 2023. It just happened to be the date that worked out, but new year, new beginning for us. From there, we decided that we were each going to run a channel. So Dave takes it on, Jonas takes it on, and we were going to have a bit of a friendly competition, have it running side by side. And there was an agreement that if one channel was hugely successful and took off, that we would both support that channel. Now, Dave thought that was going to be my channel, which would have been focused around music and some other topical content. I did not share that same confidence, knowing that music is a highly competitive field and there's a lot of industry things that go behind the scenes for a lot of the successful artists. So I still gave it my all in terms of that. However, it quickly became apparent that Dave Takes It On, which was focused around covering electric vehicles and sort of the topics surrounding that, was the most successful one. Particularly one of the early ones was when we first looked at EV charging prices.
Yes, and it surprised me because I genuinely believed that the music one would be the one that would take off and I was going to be cameraman for Jonas. But no, it surprised us with the speed it took off. And I've learned along the way. I also, probably like many viewers, had a lot of preconceived ideas. I'd heard an awful lot. I'd had my own EV for a couple of years at this point, and never really gave it an awful lot of thought. But Jonas came up with the title Takes It On, and we literally just went back to basics. So instead of accepting things that we'd heard or believed, we just went out and tried it. So when we heard a rumour about something to do with charging, instead of accepting that or passing that on, we just went out and tried it and recorded it and made notes about it. And we learnt along the way. We learnt an awful lot. And we learnt that most of what we knew was actually wrong.
Yes. Looking back on the very first videos that we were putting out, radically different. We were trying like background music. That was not popular. We put so much effort into the studio setup, and then gradually we changed things to make it more convenient rather than putting all that effort in. So you've probably seen a whole variety of different studios, lighting styles, setups. I'd say even now that we're not going to claim we really know what we're doing. I think it's a case that we are mavericks. We just get out there, do it. We listen to what our audience says. We think about what we'd like to see on the channel, and that really takes us to where we are today.
It's also, we get out and meet people. It's amazing when you're in a car park and there's a charger there and you're just about plugging in and someone walks over and says, "Hi Dave," and it turns out to be the CEO of one of the CPOs, one of the charging networks. And it's great to be recognised. It's great to be recognised by viewers as well. Everywhere we go, we are instantly recognised. And we also meet an awful lot of installers and delivery drivers with chargers on the back of the lorries, electricians and connectors. And some of them are very, very happy to stand and talk to us for a while. Some give us some great insights into what's going on. Others say, please don't tell anyone I told you this, but here's some news for you. And we get a lot of feedback from the companies they work for. Thanks for giving a shout out on your channel, Dave. All the advertising is most welcome. So the channel's growing. It's growing in stature. We're becoming more recognised and much more of a force to be reckoned with, and we will go out and we'll find things that are happening out there, and we will call them out and we'll name names.
And I think that's really where a lot of the ideas for the channel come from, which is me simply asking questions to Dave. Sometimes they're ones that are easy to answer and should be pretty obvious to someone driving an EV, which I don't. And other times it got Dave to really look into actually what's the deal. What's the deal with that? What's the situation? Having to do research, go away, speak to people. It's kind of got us to where we are. And one of the recent videos we did, which was quite successful, it was Birch Services, where they'd recently upgraded and turned on the Tesla chargers. I was simply asking the questions that I think other people would perhaps ask that are not necessarily experts to the same level as Dave.
It's also the people that we meet. We meet CEOs, just happen to come across them on our travels, and most of them really willing to chat to us and don't always give us a lot of information, but always happy to chat. We meet an awful lot of installation engineers, CPOs. We meet electricians, delivery drivers of chargers. And they are. We meet them all over the country. So we will be down in Cornwall one time, or we'll meet someone, and then the next time we'll be up in the Lake District, and we'll meet the same person, and they're installing down in Cornwall maybe BP pulse chargers, and we meet them up in the Lake District installing maybe Instavolt chargers. Just same people, and they give us an insight into what's going on, and sometimes they'll say, don't tell them we told you this, but, and they'll give us some information. So we then say things like, we understand that this is happening. And other times they tell us outright, this is happening, and we're happy to. And also we get feedback from the companies they work for. They get quite a few emails and comments. Thanks, Dave, for mentioning our company. A shout out's always good for us. So we're getting to be a bit more well known now, and it's really good to be recognised, as many of the comments are saying. It's a very balanced approach. We don't have an agenda. I personally am very biased towards Teslas, but that really is part of the research that I do. For example, if I find that an awful lot of people tell me that they don't get over-the-air updates, whatever make it is, I'm not going to pick a specific one, but if a lot of people say they never get them, and I've got a 9-year-old car and I'm still getting 2 or 3 a month, and they are useful ones as well, not just map updates, then that's not me being a Tesla fanboy. That's me being biased towards a manufacturer who looks after their owners. I got, for example, a message about a year ago which said that your original modem is a 3G modem, and you will notice it will start slowing down as the networks switch off their 3G transmitters. However, don't worry, whenever you notice it's a problem, we have a 4G upgrade waiting for you. It was, I can't remember what it was like 50 quid. It was a stupid amount of money, and it was like an hour's work, and I think they came to me to do it. And that sort of thing, it doesn't make me a Tesla fanboy. It makes me realise that Tesla cars are in a separate league. And people see that as being a Tesla fanboy. It isn't, it's just recognising what Tesla do for their drivers. Now, the Chinese are rapidly catching up. And this year is probably the first year that if I am replacing my car, which I will do at some point, I would actually seriously consider a Chinese. The one thing that holds me back is the support. The technology going into the Chinese is superb.
With that, though, for many people, there would be a concern that with the escalating trade wars that we're seeing at the moment, we saw with mobile phones how Huawei, a big Chinese manufacturer of smartphones, was cut out of the US market, but also because of the sanctions that were put in place, that prevented Huawei from shipping with Android on any phone in Europe and other areas. If you were to consider that, so that the vehicle might be right, the tech might be right, would you be concerned around the future support of that vehicle?
I don't think so specifically for that reason. I mean, in theory, the new president in America could blacklist Europe and the UK and put sanctions against us all and stop Tesla from doing stuff in Europe. You can take these things to silly levels. So there's always a real underlying concern. But with size comes a bit of security that you can't just shut them off. So it wouldn't be a major concern.
Okay, and so if you were to look at one of the Chinese manufacturers for vehicles, are there any particular manufacturers or models that stand out for you that sort of put them at the top of the pack?
I think it's manufacturers rather than specific models because they have different purposes. From the little budget models, which they're not for me. But the one that interests me is the Xiaomi. Apple had a go at trying to make the EV from being a mobile phone manufacturer, and Xiaomi have actually done it. They were a mobile phone manufacturer, and they now are making EVs very successfully. And that, to me, signals that if a mobile phone manufacturer, they do regular over-the-air updates, they do firmware updates, the software updates, and security updates and everything. So to me, their EVs would probably get a similar sort of service from them. So that sort of link up. Also, other companies which are working closely with someone like CATL with the battery. So NEO is one. They're working very closely with NEO's working very closely with CATL, and they're working now on swappable batteries. I think CATL on their own wouldn't have done this, but NEO are very big on swappable batteries, so the two together. So where you get those collaborations, you get that also to a certain degree with Volkswagen and Rivian on the software side. I hope that one works, by the way.
Have we seen any evidence of that?
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. I think the idea is fine. I don't think VW yet understands how much of a transformation they have to go through to be able to take what Rivian is writing and fit it into their car. There's still very much of the old school method of, just bolt it all together, it'll work. And Rivian is very much like Tesla, like Xiaomi. It is, you start with a computer, and then anything you bolt onto the car that the computer's in has to have the software that will talk to the computer.
It sounds like EVs really could do with their version of Android, which is that there's a baseline that all these manufacturers can build their own custom interfaces and things on top of, but there is standard functionality, there's a standard platform, whereas all of them seem to be really just trying to do it on their own with varying degrees of success.
Well, Volkswagen, again, they tried that. They had a link up with a Chinese company, and they thought they could just get this Chinese company to write a software package for them. They formed a joint venture, and it fell apart because the Chinese, it was a software company, and they were very, very good at what they were doing. And they were just telling Volkswagen, look, your car has to be compatible with our computer. Our computer will do everything you want it to, but every component of your car has to be able to talk to our computer. Otherwise, we can't can't control it. And Volkswagen were going, no, we've used these bits for the last 50 years or 20 years or whatever it is. Your computer has to be able to control our bits. And the whole thing fell apart. And that's why I have my doubts about whether it'll work with Rivian. In that Rivian's going to just find exactly the same problem. They're going to be saying to Volkswagen, you know, your window winder, your window motors or your windscreen wipers, we can't talk to them. They don't have, you know, you're buying them off a supplier. That supplier is putting a software package in there, a little chip in there with a software program in. We can't talk to that one. We need this chip in it. And Volkswagen, well, we can't get that manufacturer to put your chip into that window motor.
Is it just a lack of investment in the software? Because from my perspective, if I was a big car manufacturer and those were the components that I'd selected, and fair enough that there can be all variety of reasons for that one, then surely it's then VW's responsibility to make sure that they write any software or driver for that particular element, and then it can be controlled by the software. Surely that's just VW not putting in the effort it needs to support the components it's choosing to use.
It is, but it's down to size as well. For example, if Volkswagen have a windscreen wiper or a window motor supplier who makes the window motors, these motors, and it has a chip in it which is not compatible with Rivian, for example, Volkswagen might not have the power to tell them to change it, because they may be supplying Ford and Stellantis and Toyota that same motor with that same chip in it. And so when Volkswagen comes along and says, we want that motor, but you've got to put Rivian's chip in it and Rivian's software in it, then that supplier might turn around and say, well, look, you're only talking about $500,000 a year. We're supplying $5 million a year to Toyota, Ford, Fiat and Citroen and Renault and everyone. We're not going to change just for $500,000 a year. So sorry, VW, we can't comply. And of course, Tesla never had any of this problem, because when Tesla started, if they went to any supplier and said, we want to buy a windscreen wiper motor with this chip in it, they said, we don't make motors with chips in them. Sorry, they're all mechanical at this stage. And so Tesla 20 years ago would have to actually make their own motor and put their own chip in it and write their own program for it. And of course, because they started their own software department, they then would make sure that whatever they put into that motor and whatever program they wrote for that motor was compatible with theirs. So
is the issue then that VW is so reliant upon components just from the general market rather than building its own? And why hasn't it invested in its own in-house production if that is what's required to sort of build a modern vehicle?
They've never done it that way. There's a fabulous interview, I've shown it on a few of my videos, from Jim Farley, and he said we buy hundreds of different components from dozens of different suppliers, and we place massive big orders with them to get the price down as low as possible, and we've never done it any other way. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden we're coming along across the likes of Tesla, who do it a totally different way. And our guys, we've never written software before, ever. It's not what we do. We buy stuff in, and that's got software in and it's written. He said, but when we put it in our car and that windscreen wiper motor doesn't talk to our computer, we're not allowed to change that software, even if we knew what we were doing, because it's copyright to the supplier. And the supplier often doesn't write their own software. They have a company that writes the software for their windscreen wiper motor and their chip. And so if Ford wants to change the software to be compatible with their computer, they have to apply to the company has to apply. They have a massive infrastructure that's built up over decades, which is totally incompatible with the way that the Chinese were work, or the way that Tesla works, or the way that Rivian works.
So
just in mindset.
The Chinese manufacturers that you mentioned, so they don't have this legacy of decades of ICE manufacturing.
Chinese never made ICE cars.
Yeah.
Most people don't know this. Chinese have never had an ICE car industry. They didn't. They bought their cars off Japan. They had an ICE lorry industry. So they made their own lorries and tractors and things like that. But they never made cars for their own population. They bought their cars in from everywhere else. And so in the Industrial Revolution, up until about the year 2000, China was a very peasant country. Most of the population lived out on the farms. They lived out in the country. There was no real major industry. Throughout the 80s, 90s, it was starting to build up as people started using China for manufacturing. And as factories like Apple, like Nike even, as they started manufacturing over there, because the peasant labour was so cheap, China started building factories, and they started bringing in the peasants from the outlying areas into the cities so they could have better access to labour. And at that point, as the population came in, the population started getting a little bit of money. And then the population wanted to have their own cars, because up until then, they couldn't afford cars. But once they started being able to afford their own cars, they then wanted to buy cars in, and one of the cars they wanted were the prestige Western cars. It showed they were rich. They'd made it.
That's the BMWs, Mercedes? Is that what?
Also Toyotas as well. It was just anything Western or popular was popular with them. And at that point, this was coming up to the year 2000. At that point, China realised it didn't have a car industry of its own to supply its own population. Had lorries, and lorries were quite successful, buses and things like that, but no car industry. And that was where the massive breakthrough came, because the Chinese government sat down and they said, right, we need a car industry. We want to be world leaders in cars. And nobody ever knows who actually this is attributed to. Somebody said, yeah, but looking back, it took Toyota Japan, about 20 years from when they decided to attack the Western market to get good at it. The first attempt by the Japanese was absolutely pathetic and nobody liked them. So the old Datsuns, so some of a certain age will remember these. And somebody pointed out that if China's going to take 20 years to get their car industry up to acceptable to the West, they calculated that in 20 years' time, we won't be buying petrol cars anyhow. It's going to go EVs. So they said, well, let's skip all that. Let's make rubbish cars, but make them EVs. Nobody wants to buy them. We'll sell them to our own population. Really cheap, nasty, horrible, catching fire, whatever it is. Let's make nasty EVs, sell it really cheap to our own people, get all this out of the way, and over the next 20 years we'll get good, better and better and better. And then when we're ready to start selling them to the Western world, we'll actually be world leaders in it, because the West is not going to change overnight. And that's how, over the 20 years, they started making the most appalling cars you can ever imagine, the Wulings and other such things that we wouldn't even allow into the country, let alone drive them. But they learned. And they also set up the batteries. They also had good battery plants, factories already. And so everything came together. And they got all the rubbish stuff out the way, and then they started making actually quite good cars. And the rest, as they say, is history. They just happened to now be really good at making EVs. They're some of the best battery manufacturers in the world, and they are now way ahead, 10, 20 years ahead of what we do in the West. I exclude Tesla from this, and I exclude Rivian from this. Rivian is basically Tesla engineers who've gone and set up a different company. And Rivian has yet to prove whether it can succeed. Just saw in the news today. It's just had another cash injection. They've not yet reached the point where they can survive. I hope they do. They got all promise, but
I think that was true of Tesla back in the day, though. It required quite a lot of bailouts, but people saw the potential for the company in the future, and that's led to where it is today.
Well, it was Elon went to Apple and basically offered to sell the company if they bailed him out, and they said there's no future in it. And then a few years later, there's a bit of a future there. Apple can't make their own EV. Bit ironic, really, but it's funny how it goes around. But Tesla many times they actually virtually went, well, they would have gone bust. They were within hours sometimes of going bust. And then just something happened that made it. The big one, as recently as 2017, this is 7-8 years ago, was the launch of the Model 3. If that had gone flat, Tesla would have been finished. And then this is what upsets me, because the technology for EVs has been around for 20 years. And some of the big manufacturers, the legacy manufacturers, the VWs of the Fords and Stellantis, they could have produced some of the budget cars, the Polos and the Astras and the little Toyota Corollas and things.
It sounds a bit like the digital camera manufacturers. Yeah. The legacy camera manufacturers didn't want to move over to digital, and they've effectively doomed their companies.
It is. They didn't think there was anything there. They didn't want to upset their own existing sales, so they missed an opportunity. They could have destroyed Tesla 15, 20 years ago and been world leaders today, like the Chinese are in EVs, and they chose not to. They chose, let's just stick with what we know. Let's just...
So is that it, really, which is that the Western manufacturers have suffered because they've not invested in technology. They've played it safe and ignored basically a major technological revolution.
Yeah, you see, any product has a limit in development. You can't go further than a certain amount. And the petrol engine is a good example of that. You can tweak it. But in the old days, 100 years ago, you get 5 miles to the gallon if you're lucky. And then it got better and better and better. And then you get up to 30, 40 miles to the gallon. But today, you can't really get very much further. They're getting up into the 50, 60 miles to the gallon. But every time they bring out this latest new, brand new engine, it's the latest thing, this is going to revolutionise petrol engines, and it does 3% more miles per gallon than the last one.
And some of the trends is just for heavier vehicles like the Range Rovers and things like that, which are heading in the opposite direction.
Yeah, but that's done purely for profit. That if you make a bigger, more expensive one, there are some things you can add to a car that just gives you a much higher profit margin.
Yeah, they're not adding to the technology; they're adding to their prestige.
Yeah. So the ICE car reached a certain development probably 20, 25, 30 years ago. And all that's happened in the meantime, it's been tweaked. So when I was a kid, or when I first got my first car, going from one model to the next was a big jump in technology, performance, space, features, everything. My first one didn't have a radio built in. Then we got radios. It didn't have electronic ignition, didn't have power steering, didn't have synchromesh on first gear. Oldies will know what that is, youngsters won't. And so each model was a big advance in technology, in goodies. Nowadays, there is very little new in a new car that isn't in the old one. Yes, you might get a 16-speaker Bose system. The old one had a 12-speaker. Big deal. Can you actually tell the difference? You might get a 7-speed gearbox instead of a 6. You might get a little bit of sound deadening. Your car might do 47.2 miles per gallon instead of 46.8. These are the differences, but the difference to trade up has got wider as they pile in more goodies. So now, instead of costing you a couple of £1,000 to trade up, it now costs you £7,000 to trade up.
So it was a case that the ICE manufacturers were just trying to do feature creep to try and push up the price. They were neglecting the budget market, and then with Chinese budget EV manufacturers coming in, they just had a huge gap in the market. It seems that the ICE manufacturers neglected the market share.
And it's the reason why the first EV, the first proper one, the Model S, I discount the Roadster, that was a funny one, but the Model S was an instant success. It was a very expensive car, it's $100,000 at the time, but it just absolutely swept the market. The public wanted something different. That was it. They wanted something different. They wanted something that was fast, it was faster than a Lamborghini, faster than a Porsche. They wanted something that looked different, that was powered differently, that had features. I mean, it's got a whoopee cushion. I mean, kids fall about laughing when you operate the whoopee cushion. And even no, it wasn't you, it was Tim, my middle son. And, I was driving along once and he was fiddling with the settings and he set the whoopee cushion so that when I put the indicator on, it farted. I mean, it amuses adults. And we want this sort of thing. We want to have, in the winter, you just set Santa mode, and when you put your indicators on, you get jingle bells instead of a tick-tock, tick-tock. And the world is ready for something different. It's like when we went, you'll remember this, when you went from a desktop PC to a tablet or a laptop. You don't get a mouse, you don't get a keyboard, it's just different. It's an advance. And the world was ready for it. And the world now is suffering because what the legacy auto is trying to offer you is a bigger and better desktop computer, a bigger and better mouse, a bigger and better keyboard. And the world now, not only, well, at one point we had on-screen keyboards, didn't we? Touch screen boards on a tablet. Now it's gone to AI and Siri and Alexa. You don't type anymore. You don't swipe anymore. You just... Alexa, what's the time? Alexa, where's the nearest pub? The world's moved on, but Legacy Auto is still trying to sell us the world's best keyboard, the world's best mouse. It's more sensitive. It's got more keys on it. We're not buying them. We're now on to Alexa, how far is it to the nearest pub? Oh, can you book me a table for 4, please, for 2:00?
So to wrap things up then, looking at where we're going. So we're early 2025 at the moment. This is obviously our chance to look forward and see where things are heading up. What do you see as the trends for EVs heading into 2025, looking ahead to between now and the end of the year?
I think you only have to look at mobile phones to know the answer to that one, and the answer is AI. That your car and your mobile phone now, they've stopped putting features in like cameras. You can't put 16 cameras in. They've got, I think they've squeezed 4 in on some, but they've gone very much onto the AI side of it. So you now talk to your phone a lot more. Your camera will, you can take I don't understand your camera, but you can take a couple of photos and it'll mix them all together, pick the best one where everyone's got their eyes open, and then print you one photo. And that's going to be the same with the cars. They're going to go very much more AI based. So
besides the talking point of AI, which is a big buzzword, I mean, what do you see being the actual use case from that? So, I mean, let's set aside self-drive for a moment, because there's a lot of development that's been quite delayed. We haven't seen anything to say that 2025 is going to be the year of that, although I'm sure progress will be made. But what's the use case? So are people going to be talking to their cars for more than just what they already do? I mean, your car already, without AI, you can speak to it, say what your destination is, and it will bring that up on the map and you can navigate to it. Yeah. That didn't require AI. So what's AI bringing to?
Oh, AI is going to integrate things like your maps with your charging, with your destination, with your servicing and everything. So you're literally going to be able to say, navigate me to the supermarket, and it will link to AI. It'll link to the traffic, so it will get you there quicker. If you need to charge, it will say to you, you need to charge, here's the nearest one. Oh, this is the cheapest one on the way, for example. And it'll just be a lot more integrated. So it'll just make driving a lot more pleasurable. Driver assist will get an awful lot better. I know there's an awful lot of people. I saw, who was it? Harry's Garage just recently did a review of the Renault 5, the brand new Renault 5. Cracking little car, very small car, a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be, but a lovely price. It's £23,000 in the UK. And one of the things he said, one of the commonest complaints I get from viewers is the driver assist is rubbish. And on the, I think it's the ID3, it always defaults to everything is on, and you have to spend 5 minutes turning everything off. No, the MG4 is another one. You have to turn everything off. And he said the Renault 5 has got one button, and when you get in it, you can press this one button, and all the driver assist turns off for you. I think AI is going to make the driver assist very much better for you, and you're going to be able to talk to your car and say, I'm a bit close, can you get a bit further back? I do mind, as you may notice, on temperature. I can say I'm cold, and it just increases the temperature 1.5 degrees. And you'll be able to talk to your car. You're driving a bit close, and it'll just space it a little bit more, or you're bit jerky on that, and it'll correct it for you.
And I suppose my question on some of this, I mean, progress is progress, and extra new features are great, but it still feels to me that AI is a bit of a buzzword, which is these things were possible without an AI processing all these complicated things behind the scenes. It's great to have new things, but say, for instance, if you wanted your car to show you live traffic in your destination, there's nothing stopping us without AI being able to bring something. So for me, I suppose I remain a bit more pessimistic around the actual use case. And the biggest concern for me, I don't know if you've seen the prices that they charge for ChatGPT subscriptions. The top end subscriptions are $200 a month. and my concern would be, wouldn't it be great for companies like Tesla, Rivian, VW, any that are looking to take EV seriously, to go, you know what, you need all of these AI features, but you're going to have to pay a monthly cost. So do you see that as where they're just going to really try to upsell you? I mean, Tesla with full self-drive, how much do they charge for that currently?
That's a classic example for Tesla. Full self-drive in the UK is £6,800, and in the States it's $8,000. However, in the States they already have a monthly subscription. You don't have to buy it in one go, and I think the subscription in the States is $200 a month. Which is, what's that, $2,000 a year. So it takes you four or 5 years to pay off as if you'd bought it. And most people don't keep their cars that long. So it's actually a good deal. So as long as you've got a choice over this, you don't have to have FSD. You can buy it, or you can rent it. I think that it's a good thing, that if you don't want it, you save your money. Where I think it's bad is where you're being forced into it. And I think it's BMW and Volkswagen started this with features that you bought with the car, like a heated seat. They started saying, right, we're now 5 years on going to now charge you if you want to use your heated seat. So from Monday the 1st of January, you're going to have to pay £5 a month if you want your seat heated.
Doesn't Tesla do that to some respect with the battery, which is that there is a larger battery capacity on some models, and you can pay for access to the additional performance that's already basically built into the car?
Yes, but they do that for a different reason. If you buy a car and it says you've got a range of 300 miles, then you've got a range of 300 miles. If Tesla, for reasons of economy, decide to put in a battery which has 500 miles range, you don't know that, and you're not buying that. So you're buying a car which has a 300-mile range. If 5 years later you still have a car that does 500-mile range, and 300, and 10 years later you still have a car that does 300-mile range, that's fine. What Tesla's doing is saying in 5 years' time, You can keep your 300-mile range if you want, but if you want, by the way, we did install a bigger battery than we told you. If you want to unlock an additional 200, you pay us 2,000 quid. And from then on, your battery will give you 500-mile range, but you don't have to. If you pay us nothing, you still get your 300. And that was the difference with Volkswagen and BMW. They were trying to charge you for something that you already had. They withdrew it from you unless you paid. Tesla was saying, no, you keep what you got all the time, but if you want extra, you just buy it. There's nothing immoral.
I suppose the concern is if you're putting in batteries that are much larger, have that much higher capacity, that's increasing the weight of the vehicle.
It is.
And that is potentially taking away from some of the economy of it.
It is.
And it is putting it behind a paywall. So I still have some reservations around actually installing these much larger batteries and then offering people the option to purchase that capacity later.
If you look at something like a Volkswagen Golf, Volkswagen Golf has a range of engines. They might range from one of the little 3-cylinder ones right the way up to a Volkswagen Golf GTI with a 3-litre V6 or whatever it is. They probably have a range of about 16 engines. Each of those engines goes through a development process which costs millions, and then they have to build each of those, and then they have to stock components for those for perpetuity, effectively, as long as there are cars on the road, so you can always get parts for them. If instead Volkswagen said, well, we're only going to make one engine, it's a V6, it's the 3-litre, but in the basic model, we're going to throttle it back so you can only do the speed as if it was a 3-cylinder, and we'll charge you the price as if we had fitted a little 3-cylinder engine. But the beauty is that you'll get a nice cheap car. It won't go as fast as a V6, but it's cheap. And that's what Tesla are doing. If Tesla only ever make one battery size for the Model 3, but they block it off with software, they have massive economy of scale, massive. They only ever make one battery. They can make millions of them, and it's much, much cheaper. So you get the advantage of a cheaper car. In terms of economy, yes, it would be slightly more economical if you had a smaller battery which gave you exactly the right weight and everything else. But you're getting a cheaper car. And the car will always do whatever the range and the efficiency it promises you. So if it says it does 4 miles per kilowatt hour, you're going to get 313 miles range and it'll do 127 miles an hour. That's what it will do. So the fact that your battery is bigger isn't affecting what you're getting out of it. It's affecting what you could have got out of it had they put a smaller battery in, but then you'd have had to pay more to buy the car. It's a balance.
But I suppose why would you have to pay more? I mean, the resources, the cost of the materials, the metals and things like that. I would have thought there's a environmental angle to say that should people have batteries in the car, all the mining, all of the production that goes into it, that they're effectively not able to use. So I think there's an environmental argument for not taking that approach, personally.
There's another environmental and economical argument for saying that if you're having a bigger battery than we tell you, let's say they give you an extra 10%, then if you're keeping your car forever and your battery deteriorates over time and is getting down to the point at which it would fail under the warranty terms, you can just release an extra 10% and your battery will carry on without failing for another 10 or 20 years.
Does that happen, though, do we know?
It could do.
Potentially.
If they have extra capacity in there, instead of offering it to you as a paid option to release it, they just release it to prevent the battery going into a warranty claim.
Well, I mean, batteries all have a degree of over-provisioning to make sure that
they work.
Yeah. So I suppose the question is, how much over-provisioning is beneficial to the customer and the sort of avoiding that vehicle being scrapped in the future versus how much is making it uneconomical and less environmentally friendly. I think it's a very fine balancing act, and I don't think that any of those equations can change at any time.
No. And I'd like to think mine, because I had mine tested recently. I did a video on this. I'd like to think mine's actually running at 90%. It's 9 years old. The battery was tested at 90%, and I think that's staggeringly good for a car that was built in 2015. Brought over here in early 2016 and registered then. To still have 90% capacity is staggering. On that basis, it's going to last until another 20 years before it gets down to the 70%, at which it is supposed to be unusable. But if sometime in the next 20 years there is a hidden 10 or 20%, and that can be released, this could go on another 30 years.
And I think that brings up an interesting point. I saw an article recently where it said that now that they've got more data to base it upon, that electric vehicles have the same lifespan as ICE vehicles. So I hope that is something that can take people's apprehension away, which is that doesn't matter which way you go. If you want to go ICE, if you want to go EV, they are going to last for a comparable length of time, and that includes the battery health that everybody was so concerned and so scared about, and we haven't seen materialise in the same way. Obviously, different manufacturers, there are different examples, but it's not been this big catastrophe that many forecast.
There was also a very strange comment I received from a viewer who said there was, I think it was a What Car survey that said EVs are less reliable than ICE cars. Just reading that, it was a blunt sentence like that, and I thought, that's a really strange sentence, because does that mean every single EV ever made is worse than the worst ICE car ever made? Because there are some really atrocious ICE cars out there. And it's a sentence that just didn't make any sense to me. Surely there must be one really appallingly unreliable ICE car that's been back for so many factory recalls that's worse than the best of the EVs, etc. And so you just get these bland statements, and they're meaningless on their own. There must be some EVs that are very reliable and some that are very poor. There must be some ICE cars that are very reliable and some that are appallingly bad. And you can't have a bland statement that says this, that, or the other. All ICE cars are better than all EVs. And it's.
I think it's very reductive with a lot of the discussions, which is everything has to be an extreme. It has to be that EVs are so much worse or so much better that there is a lack of nuance. With EVs, we know that there are various efficiency, some can get more miles per kilowatt than others. We know that some have more technical features. We know that some are heavier, some are lighter than others. So everything seems to just want that extreme. This supports what I believe. And I think that's what we've got to get away from, which is that with any vehicle, with any brand, with any technology, there are issues. And it is for individuals to look at all the evidence out there, look at the reviews, make an informed decision, speak to friends, family that have experience with it.
Just going to do something. Let me just do this, because on my phone, I've got an iPhone, and they do allow you to look at your battery health. And these are really quite interesting. It's not an old phone. I'm not going to tell you exactly how old it is, but it's not very old. My phone here, it says, this is interesting, most people don't realise this, phone batteries, like all rechargeable batteries, are consumable components that become less effective as they age. Okay, all batteries. My capacity now, this is a measure of battery capacity relative to what it was when new. My battery capacity on this phone is 86%. Right, that's crashed quite a lot, and it's not very old. And so it's just one of those things that with our phones, one of the reasons people change phones is because the battery life reduces, or the speed of the process is slowed down to try and extend the battery life, which is something Apple did in the past. We accept it on the phone. We swap our phones when the battery life starts going. How come we don't expect it on EVs?
And I think, if anything, the rate at which I go through phones, usually when I have to upgrade a phone, my phone's less than 2 years old. The battery life has crashed on it. It's a Pixel 8, and despite all the technology, all the reassurances, all these efficiency improvements and everything, there's a dramatic reduction in how long my phone lasts. If EVs were going through that same sort of collapse, there would be non-stop stories around that, and also you would be able to see that with your vehicle. We don't see that, and so...
And it's 9 years old.
And what I think is impressive is that my phone, if my phone was, I was still using it in 9 years' time, I'd probably be lucky to get an hour on it. I really would, and so... the battery management and the technology that goes into EVs and the way that those batteries are used is so radically different. It's really interesting to see where things are now, and also with all these new battery technologies, where are things going to end up? Because even if people look at EVs now, look at the technology and go, you know what, I don't want this. This is not right. It doesn't have the longevity that I want. I'm concerned about range, anything like that. We look at how much EVs have progressed. ICE vehicles have been around for over a century.
Yeah.
What we should be looking at, and the discussion should always be, where are EVs going to be in a century?
Yeah.
And then by the time that's come around, what will the next technology be that will replace them?
Although the killer in that argument is that electric vehicles were around before ICE cars.
Yes.
The official, I looked at this the other day. This is the beauty of research. I love research, by the way, and I've got a very retentive memory. As I get old, I forget loads of things, but I do a lot of research and I do remember that. And it was 1832 that the first person was credited with inventing the first electric vehicle. 1832. First ICE vehicle is credited around about 1882, so 50 years later. But of course, it was America that killed the electric vehicle off because in the late 80s, you had steam cars, you had electric cars, and you had the up and coming petrol cars, all for sale at the same time. And what made the petrol car take over was that the petrol companies, which were just up and coming at that time, started putting in petrol stations, and that gave them freedom to drive wherever they wanted to. At the time, there was no national grid for electricity, and the idea of burning wood for steam just was a non-starter. So the steam fell away and the electric car fell away and the petrol took over, and then it took over everywhere. But now electric cars have been around a lot longer than the ICE cars. But there's a huge gap where the petrol took over. ICE, the EV was basically killed off, and it's only recently, last 20 years, where the EV has suddenly come back and said, yeah, we'll make it this time, and it has.
Right, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there.
I think we have talked for quite long enough on this first podcast. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed this, the first of our podcasts. If you have, please leave a comment down below. Also, if you've got any idea about what you'd like us to talk about, leave that down below as well. So thank you very much for listening. I'm Dave.
And I'm Jonas.